Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee taking place from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. Time is 11 o'clock. My name is Councillor Johnny Morris, one of the committee members of this particular Licensing Subcommittee. The open parts of this meeting are being recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. Please can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent or switched off entirely. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Now moving on to the agenda to confirm a chairperson for the meeting.
Agreed.
Marvellous. And disclosure of interests. Do members or officers have any interests they wish to declare? I have none. Okay, so we move on to the item of business, the application for review of premises licence, Boomtown Fair, Matley Bowl, Horsford Road, Winchester, report number LR 588. And now I'll hand over to Carol for her introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The public report and appendices, which include representations for 17 other persons, were sent out to members and made available on the Council's website. The report contained exempt appendices of the full police review application with supporting documents and the licence holder's evidence. This report relates to an application to review the premises licence under Section 51 of the Licensing Act 2003 for Boomtown Fair, which is held annually at Matley Bowl, Horsford Road, Winchester. The application was submitted on the 2nd of October 2024 by PC Brian Swallow on behalf of the Chief Officer of Police, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary, which is a responsible authority under Section 13 of the Licensing Act 2003. The applicant served a copy of the application on all the responsible authorities and the premises licence holder on the 2nd of October 2024. The application relates to the prevention of crime and disorder and public safety licensing objectives following the death of a 22-year-old male at this year's event of a suspected overdose of unlawful drugs, and this is detailed in Appendix 1 of the report. An unredacted full application, which is exempt from publication, can be found at Appendix 4. The applicant had requested that the following conditions are imposed on the premises licence to ensure that the licensing objectives are upheld. 1. Any person entering the event and found to be in possession of unlawful drugs shall be refused entry. 2. Any person in the event found in possession of unlawful drugs shall be ejected unless there's an immediate medical reason not to do so. Boomtown Festival UK Limited have held a premises licence Prem 773 since the 30th of July 2019. The licence authorises regulated entertainment, late night refreshment and supply of alcohol on one occasion per calendar year for 6 consecutive days. A full copy of the premises licence can be found at Appendix 3. Matthew Phipps, on behalf of TLT LLP, is acting on behalf of the premises licence holders in relation to this review application and is here today. No representations were received from any other responsible authority. However, the South Downs National Park Authority commented that they agree with the suggested wording for conditions and so wish to support the police in seeking this. I think it's useful to mention here for all parties that a reminder that the planning and licensing regimes are separate and are subject to their own enforcement. So as an example, that if the premises license legislation allows you to continue to make decisions without the fact that there is planning permission in force, we do as an authority say in our policy that we expect planning permission to be in place, but there is no legislation to require planning permission to be there for licensing matters to be decided. So where there is still a premises licence in force, if there is no planning permission, they would be subject to planning enforcement. 17 valid representations were received from other persons, mainly in reference to the public nuisance licensing objective, and these can be found in Appendix 2 of the report. On Thursday afternoon, the 21st of November 2024, the licensing authority received an email on behalf of the Chief Officer of Police stating, "The Chief Officer of Police hereby gives notice that they are withdrawing the review application for Boomtown Fair Limited that is scheduled for a licensing hearing on 25th of November. He wishes to seek continued engagement and mediation with the operators and their legal representatives to reach a suitable outcome that is agreeable to all parties by addressing the issues and concerns that have been highlighted within the application. It is hoped that this outcome can be achieved prior to next year's event." Following the police withdrawing their application, the subcommittee may wish to obtain legal advice on the situation and what this means for the remainder of the review process. And I'll pause my introduction there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, I think we would appreciate legal advice at this moment.
Thank you, Chair and members. So obviously you've heard late on Thursday in the afternoon, the police have withdrawn, if you like, their representations. The review was brought on the pretext of engaging the prevention of crime and disorder, one of the licensing objectives. However, that being said, during the course of the actual advertisement for the review process, you have before you 17 representations made, and they appear in the order papers before you, members. So 17 other persons have made representations as a result of this review process. We have some of the representors here today. We have the respondents in relation to the review here today. Now, ultimately, there are provisions in law which allow for a hearing to be adjourned. Now, it would probably be correct in this particular instance to at least look at the provision and what that actually means for this remainder of the review process. So the hearing regulations of 2005, the full title, the Licensing Act 2003, Hearing Regulations 2005, Regulation 12, allows a licensing authority to adjourn a hearing to a specified date or arrange for a hearing to be held on specified additional dates where it considers this to be necessary for its consideration of any representations or notice made by a party. So that's the provision. It has to be necessary to consider any representations or notice made by any party. Now, we've heard last week, Thursday, the police have withdrawn its substantive representations in relation to the prevention of crime and disorder. The other 17 interested parties, however, have probably made representations which engage an alternative licensing objective, and that's the prevention of public nuisance. Now, that being said, they are live, they are before you. Those 17 representations appear in the order paper, and we have some of the representors here today. So my strong advice to this particular committee, and probably you may want to hear from the respondent Boomtown and Mr. Phipps on this point, and indeed those interested parties who are present, about the issue of adjournment solely. I wouldn't at this stage attract any representations or submissions on the actual merits of the review and those particular representations. So I think at this juncture, we look at the actual regulation and consider whether it's prudent in this particular instance and necessary to adjourn so that it allows the respondent premises license holder to reinterpret their response in light of the other 17 representations, because one can imagine it was engaged primarily on prevention of crime and disorder. It would allow the correct time in a fair and reasonable manner for Boomtown to go away, recollect, and look at what those other letters actually engage in terms of the alternative licensing objective, the prevention of public nuisance. Moreover, it would allow those other parties who have made representations to also consider their position. And then we come back on a reconvened date at a future point in time that the officers can arrange, so that we may then hear the substantive remainder elements of the review before you, and that would be the other interested parties, because the police now are not actually performing in this particular capacity. They've withdrawn their representation. So my strong advice to you, members, would be to consider the point of adjournment in its entirety, solely this procedural point, and hear from Boomtown, the other representatives who are here, and then take a view as to whether or not you feel it is necessary in the interest here to allow each party to fair and reasonably go away, recollect, and come back at another point in time.
Thank you. Carol, did you have any more statements to add to that?
I've nothing further to add, Chair. I think, yeah, we're secret.
Okay, so the question before us is whether to adjourn or not, and so we should hear from the other people here present. The respondents, Boomtown, do you have any comments to make on the adjournment?
So yes. Thank you, Councillor. To be fair, sir, it's very difficult to argue with anything that Mr. Lucas has said. I think a couple of points, if I may. The first is that the withdrawal of the application was effectively the day before yesterday. I appreciate it was Thursday afternoon, but to all intents and purposes, for most of us at least, it was the equivalent to the day before yesterday. So it is very, very fresh. It is fair to say that it does raise questions for us all that we are, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Mr. Lucas, but he is giving me a nod, and I anticipate he knows what I'm about to say, that we are all reflecting on of what the proposition is. And I say that for this reason. If we just park licensing law for the moment, and I do appreciate it's a licensing here, we can't park licensing, but if you have an application and the application is withdrawn, common sense would tell you that's the end of the thing. I appreciate that there may very well be perfectly legitimate counter arguments to that, and that's obviously something that Mr. Lucas is going to reflect on with his colleagues. You'll appreciate, in the interests of transparency, it's also something that we will want to reflect on, because it feels, it does, I'm not for a moment suggesting it's wrong, but it feels counterintuitive as a minimum for an application to proceed when the application's been withdrawn. But if you were to ask me the straight question as, right, well, tell me what your submissions are on the law, the only straight answer to you today is I don't know, because candidly we just haven't really had time, and the reference to the proposition that we would or that your officers would be minded to recommend adjournment came through to us fairly late on Friday. I have thought about it over the weekend, but do I have a good answer for you today? No. The position in regard to an adjournment that may just merit an additional observation from me, which touched on by Mr. Lucas, is that the basis on which adjournments are effectively permitted, this is a summary, in licensing proceedings are if they are in the interests of justice. That's the fundamental question for you as a committee is this in the interests of justice? And in those circumstances, I'm bound to say I have to concur with Mr. Lucas. None of us, without being rude to Mr. Lucas, none of us really know the right answer to how to progress as we sit here at 11 o'clock on Monday morning. We will both have the opportunity to reflect on that, and no doubt we'll be engaged in a dialogue on that, and a settled position will allow us to proceed. That's not in front of you today. I can't see that any of us can go ahead fully knowing exactly where we are. The other point that Mr. Lucas raises, which is just merits a secondary comment from me, is he very fairly says we have produced some not insignificant evidence, primarily directed toward the application. The application has been withdrawn. Some of that evidence touches on the points that are raised by the interested parties. Some of it is specific and discrete to the interested parties, issues perhaps of noise and ecology, which is a slightly broad brush observation. But there are issues of crime and disorder raised by the interested parties, and parts of the evidence that we have raised directed at the police application may very well be legitimately put in front of you for you to consider if we proceed on the basis of what the residents have said. But which parts of those pieces of evidence and material, candidly, I suspect we all, including your legal advisor and your licensing officer, probably need a little bit of time to reflect on and think about that. And so we would undoubtedly, on the basis of continuing, we would look to revise and review the evidence that's going to be in front of you. It will only in all reality get shorter. It will not get longer, but it would not be appropriate, for example, to be producing a whole policy to you when we're only going to be referring to one section or paragraph from it. And I'm afraid time doesn't allow us to do that this morning.
Thank you from Boomtown Solicitor. And now we go to interested parties, whether they have anything they wish to say on the question of adjournment. And I'll just take them in the order they're written on my piece of paper. Does David Payne wish to go first? Thank you.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Vice Chair of Cherokee Parish Council. Three of us have turned up today because we respect the subcommittee and the process. And the hearing has been scheduled for some time. And we've made preparations. We've travelled in this morning. And I would like to point out that Boomtown has already provided quite a lot of evidence to you regarding the representations that have been made. I think it's a 37-page document attached to supplementary agenda number 1, which is the non-redacted evidence. And there's a lot of commentary regarding each of the representations that Boomtown have provided. And so I think our point of view is that we're here and ready to go. You have already had evidence from the licence holders regarding the representations that we have made. I acknowledge that the police have obviously not turned up and that they've withdrawn their application. But there doesn't seem to have been a plan B taken into account. Because I understand it's not unusual for police to withdraw representations and requests for reviews if they are in negotiation with the licence holder. So I don't think this is a particularly unusual situation. And we will be disappointed if you decided to adjourn, because we will have to return on another date. So I think, I don't know if the other two attendees wish to address you, but I would urge you to continue and to disregard those elements of the papers that were presented by the police in order that the public interest can be served by the process being continued and finished. Thank you.
Thank you for your words. Do other representatives wish to speak? We have Brendan Gibbs. Would you like to say a few words? Thank you.
My name is Brendan Gibbs, and I'm the clerk of Titchbourne Parish Council. And obviously, I've had to follow instructions from my council regarding the proposal for the adjournment. As the representative from Boomtown indicated, things came very late in the day, and I expressed disappointment that the police withdrew their application or their documentation so late, and that they're not here to actually explain before this committee why they've done that. And that's one of the things that possibly I would ask. As far as the proposal to adjourn, I slightly differ from Mr. Councillor Payne's view. I'd like to support Mr. Lucas's representation regarding an adjournment, because we need more time now to consider just exactly where we're going with this. Our representation was on the public nuisance. If you wish to deal with that now, you may do so. But that's the view that I'm expressing on behalf of Titchbourne Parish Council.
Thank you very much. And our third representative, Terence Jones, do you wish to speak on the question of adjournment?
Good morning. On the question, I live about a mile from the Boomtown site and have done for 39 years. On the question of adjournment, all of the material I have supplied to you, I have supplied to Boomtown's ecological advisors some months ago, so that that material is not a surprise to them, and they've had it for much longer than this licensing application has been in place. And so, with respect, you're not going to get any more new knowledge by postponing part of this hearing, because you've had that information for some time and you have actually responded to it in a letter about 5 to 6 days ago. So I think it is unfortunate to postpone this. If the, and I would rather go on, but if the meeting is postponed, I think it's important that you say that I have the right, and presumably this applies to the other parties as well, to also bring additional material to the table if the meeting is postponed.
Thank you. Can I just check with our legal advisor on that particular point about whether you can bring additional material?
The point is, Chairman, the representation has been made, so you're allowed to amplify and embellish certain points. You cannot go outside the four corners of your representation. Your representation, I assume, is about conservation of species, habitats, flora and fauna. Yes, that issue is squarely engaged. That's a fact and issue, if you like. So any further material will be on the four corners of that particular fact and issue, and that will be okay. It's just if a particular party moves outside of their original representation and brings into play other elements that the respondent hasn't had time to prepare to. I think you've heard from the parties now, Chairman. What I would suggest, and if I make the closing point here, is, or indeed we go back to the respondent beforehand to summarise. So, yeah.
Not for me to interrupt you, Mr. Lucas. So there's only just one point I'd just like to pick up on that Mr. Payne is a point he made, and not for me to challenge what he says, but important that you hear the counterpoint from me. He mentioned that it was not unusual for the police to withdraw applications for review if they're in negotiation with the parties. I take what he says at face value, but I'm bound to tell you that's not my experience at all. As a business, TLT have probably undertaken more than 150 reviews across the last 20 years of this licensing legislation. And for those of you who've been around long enough, you'll know today is the 20th anniversary of the go live date of the Licensing Act 2003. And we have talked about it in the office, and we can think of one similar case in the preceding 20 years. And that was in circumstances where we had agreed a basis on which to proceed, and it had concluded the review. This, and I say this on behalf of your officers, and it is not false flattery, not having a plan B, as was suggested, was perhaps a point of criticism. It is not fair criticism. This is an unusual circumstance on any view. Whatever you decide whether to adjourn or not, the very fact we're having this conversation at the start of a review hearing will tell you how unusual this is. That's the only point of it.
Thank you.
So, Chairman, just to summarise, Mr. Phipps, may I ask, would your client have been represented by counsel if this was going to a contested hearing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I think the point here is obviously that needs to be asked, and thank you for confirming. The respondent here is not represented by counsel, and if it was a full hearing, counsel would be engaged for the respondent. So that is also an issue here, that every party has a right to be fully represented. Mr. Phipps, I believe you're a solicitor, counsel would have been engaged to advance on behalf of the actual respondent here. Also, this is not squarely about the merits. It's a point of law, I think, between the parties, and you've heard from those representors on the facts, if you like, that are an issue. But the adjournment will also allow the respondent via his representatives, and indeed via an opinion if needs be from counsel because of this unique circumstance, and we can correctly engage on this very novel point as to whether or not the hearing can go forwards, given that the main applicant is now not party to the proceedings. What you're left with are the residue from other interested parties. Now, that is also a point of law. So I need members to understand the difference between facts in dispute as well as the point of law here as to whether or not everything falls away because your main vested statutory consultee, i.e. the police, is not a party anymore. And I think that's fair that we take that away before the panel retires and makes their decision, so everyone can hear all of the arguments and indeed the point about whether or not Boomtown are fully represented with council present.
And sorry, I'm speaking so much this morning. May I just make one point to be fair and transparent? Absent the applicant for the review, although it was correct as of Thursday afternoon, before we heard of the police withdrawal, the council was instructed and would have been here this morning. On any view, the review is a narrower review. That's not in any way to diminish what's been said by the residents, but it is a narrow review because it's absent the applicant, who are the constabulary. So all of the points Mr. Mr. Lucas makes are very valid, but just not the represented by council point, because albeit I'm not contesting the commentary about adjournment, it might be that you have me, not council, once the dust has settled and we have a better understanding of what issues we're dealing with. I'm not saying he won't be instructed, but I think to be fair and transparent in front of you today, that's something we need to reflect on as well.
Thank you. If we have no further comments, so it's now down to the committee to decide the issue of, yes, to discuss the issue of adjournment. So we ask that everyone else retires while we make this. We will retire to make the decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Claire, sorry, can I just double check which room we're going to, please? Thank you.
Member said you want me to retire.
If we're ready, can we resume the recording? Thank you. Okay, having considered the representations from the representatives of the premises license holder and other interested parties, the subcommittee have decided to adjourn the hearing to a future date. This shall allow all parties to consider the remainder of the review in light of the police's withdrawal of representations. Furthermore, this adjournment shall facilitate consideration of the unique circumstances which have arisen, which may engage elements which require consideration of the law and whether the remainder of the review can continue. In the interest of justice, we have decided that an adjournment of this hearing is required and authorize officers to find a suitable time and date for all parties so that this can be reconvened. Thank you very much. The meeting is therefore adjourned. Thank you very much.